Welcome to another episode of the EvilTester show. In this podcast, we're going to look at the notion of why. The question, why. I'm going to look at why. I don't tend to use that question very much. I prefer to use what, where, how, who, when. Those type of questions. I'm going to cover the reasons behind that. Now, if you're interested, my name is Alan Richardson. You can find me at EvilTester.com, and all the show notes for our podcast and all the previous episodes for this podcast are at EvilTester.com/show. So I very often do consultancy with organizations. So I help them with their test processes, their development processes, their agile processes, when they're working with test automation. So I have to ask a lot of questions when I'm doing that to build a model of how they work, how they operate, what are the constraints they have, what the relationships are. But I don't tend to ask why. Now it's interesting to me because why is almost a default question. It can take the place of pretty much every other question. It's easy to ask. We don't even need to know what answer we want when we ask it. It's very ambiguous. People will interpret that for us. And that's why there's a risk that people read into that question. They read into our motivation. People might take offense. So when I'm working with clients, I tend to come in for a week, a couple of days, sometimes one day. So I've got a very short period of time in which to build up a model of the system of development, the interactions, reasons, issues. I could ask why. I could ask, why do you do things this way? Why do you use this particular tool? Why do you not do things that way? I don't usually do that because I get a lot of conflicting answers. I don't often get evidence in response to a why question. I get a lot of beliefs. I don't get as many actionable insights as I do if I ask how. If I wanted a long consultancy engagement that builds up a dependency on me as a consultant, then I could ask why. Why would be a great question, because I can chain all the whys. I can get a really long discussion, a really big tree of reasons and issues and potential experiments to do, and it can take a long time. Right? That might be one reason, cynically, why big consultancies offer the five whys questioning technique as a methodology. Who knows? I tend to avoid that because when I consult, I want actionable insights, next steps, obvious alternatives, evidence. What have we tried before? What worked? What made us think that didn't work? What measurement did we put in place to determine whether it works? If you want software testing or development consultancy, then check out EvilTester.com/consultancy. But we should have a look at why do we ask why? Right, now this is a childhood thing. It's built into us as a default question very early on. Why is the sky blue? Because there's an atmosphere. Why? Because if we didn't have an atmosphere, we would die. Why? Because all the air would go into space? I don't know. Right? At some point, there's a chain where I don't know the answer. I'm starting to make this up. And for kids, that's great, right? Because you can ask adult stuff. You can keep asking them why, and it's fun to see them get frustrated. It's fun to know that adults have a limit to their knowledge when previously these people are all knowing and completely in charge. Now in IT, management, engineering, possibly consultancy, coaching possibly, and people are often taught that why is a good question, right? The 5 whys technique. By asking why 5 times, we are told we will get to the root of a problem. It's a default. It's a default in our behavior. And the reason I say it's a default is because I've been working hard on my problem solving processes, how I ask questions, how I absorb results and build models of people to help me improve when I engage as a consultant. And it's obvious to me that it's a default because when I'm not keeping a tight rein on my thinking process and my questioning process and my modeling process, why pops up. It's a natural question to ask, and it's hard to get it out of our mind. But we don't really want to get it out of our mind. What we want is more control over our questioning process so that we do use why at times that are appropriate and we understand the reasons that we're asking that question in that way. So why is ambiguous? Right? When we ask why, we don't necessarily know the answer is going to come back. We don't even know what question people are going to interpret that to mean. If I ask you, why did you go out? You might say, because I went to meet Bob. I could have asked, who did you meet? If I ask you, why did you go out? Because I wanted to see the new Marvel film. Right? What film did you want to go and see? I could have rephrased my why question to get that answer. I don't know what you're going to answer with when I ask you why. I don't know how you're going to interpret that question. Why did you go out? Because I went to see a film in the cinema. Could have been, where did you go? Why did you go out? Because I went to see a film at 8 o'clock. When did you go out? Why did you go out? Because I had to catch a bus to go and see the film. How did you get to the cinema? Right? Each one of those why questions has been interpreted by the person as a what, or a how, or a where, or a when, or who, or possibly they might interpret it as a teleological question, right? What are the reasons behind this? What is the motivation behind this? And that motivation might be evidence supported. They might know exactly the reasons behind doing this, and they might have evidence for doing that, or it might be belief supported, right? And humans are very good at building up beliefs that have no evidence whatsoever. So the 5 whys questioning technique is very often found in all the lean books. It's classed as a lean tool, I think. Originated at Toyota. And the historical context behind this is engineering, factory process. There's an actual problem to be solved. It's usually a physical problem rather than a people problem. And everyone knows what the problem is. And everyone is on board with trying to identify the root causes of that problem. That's very different sometimes from a consultancy engagement when we're trying to identify what issues we might have, what different ways we might approach it, what are the things that are stopping us from doing things effectively. Those are much more general and very vague. So 5 whys might be targeting beliefs rather than actual physical problems. So a typical example of whys might be, why did the machine stop? Because the power went off. Why did the power go off? Because the supplier shut it down. Why did the supplier shut it down? Because we didn't pay the bill on time. Why did we not pay the bill on time? Because it's a manual process and the person who's supposed to process that was off sick. Well, at this point, we're now at a place where we could actually introduce a solution. We might have been able to introduce a solution earlier on, but we've taken why a few times. We didn't even get to the 5th why. Well, let's automate this payment processing, and we'll assign it to a team to monitor instead of a person. That way we don't have the bottleneck and risk that someone might be off sick. And we've targeted a particular problem. It's focused, and there's evidence based at each step. It's not, why did the machine stop? Because Bob didn't maintain it. Because these machines are rubbish and they always break down. Right? These are beliefs. These are justifications. These are answers to a question when I may not know the answer. So I made something up, and it's a why question. So I'm perfectly able to do that because you're asking me about beliefs. I don't really have to justify it. Now, in software or consultancy, we might be brought into an environment. I've never been brought into an environment like this. And they might go, well, why do you write test scripts? I see you write a lot of test scripts. Why do you write test scripts? Well, because Bob said we have to. Well, because we are mandated to do so. Well, because that's the right thing to do. Well, because expert X said that we should do that. And we trust expert X. Well, because that's the best thing to do. That's the best practice. Why are you asking? Right? Or I don't know. Right? I don't know. I might not know. I don't know why we write test scripts. We write test scripts. I don't know why we do it. Now, the difference here is, well, what is the actual problem? Right? Why do you write test scripts? Is the writing of test scripts a problem? Is it not? I don't know. Do we know what answer we actually want? What are we going to do with that information? Do people know the reasons behind that question? Perhaps they'll interpret this as a kind of attack on them, on their process, on their beliefs around how you test. Right? There's a lot of interpretations around that why. Now, 5 whys could be rephrased as the what caused this chain of analysis to 5 levels of direct relationship. Right? When we're going, what caused the machine to stop? Well, the power went off. Well, what caused the power to go off? Right? It's very direct. And again, we're rephrasing why questions in terms of what or how. How did the machine stop? Well, the power went off. How did the power go off? Well, we can rephrase our questions to get very direct answers that we can act on and find evidence with, because at some point we're probably going to want to put in a solution, and at some point we're going to want to do an experiment with that solution rather than commit to that solution. So if we're working with people's beliefs as a why, we need to go through a process of gathering evidence first. But maybe 5 whys leads us, and I'm not suggesting that everyone does this, perhaps 5 whys leads us to the identification of a problem without knowing whether it's a real problem or not first. Why is our testing so slow? Wait a minute, do we know that testing is slow? How have we measured testing as slow? Is it testing that's slow, or is it an ongoing process? Do we actually know what the problem is that we're asking the 5 whys about in the first place? Because when it comes to software development, systems development, processes, people, the problems are often a little bit more vague than they are when it's dealing with a particular factory level machine. Right, now 5 whys also might be targeting people's beliefs, right? Because why is very much, I think, a belief focused question. Rather than what do we believe is the reason for writing test scripts in this process, we're asking why. So is there a risk when we're chaining beliefs? If I ask you why 5 times and I receive a belief back each time, we're chaining beliefs. Is there a risk in chaining beliefs? Well, sometimes beliefs are not based on evidence. Right? Humans are very good at having beliefs, holding beliefs, and maintaining their beliefs in the face of evidence that contradicts their beliefs. We're very good at that. People are also very good at defending their beliefs and holding on to them. So if we keep asking why, people might go into a defensive mode because they're trying to protect their beliefs. They're trying to justify something that they really don't have a lot of evidence for. And that might impact our ability to work with them. There might be relationship issues there. And if you're a consultant brought in for just a couple of days, you really don't have time to deal with a lot of those that resistance. So you want to just avoid it in the first place. You don't want to ask questions that create resistance. You just want to avoid that whole thing in the first place. You make sure people understand the reasons that you're there for. Make sure people understand the reasons that you're asking the questions for. Make sure people understand the models that you're building and how you're going to use them. So why is a very good question for working with people's beliefs? An incredibly good question. And if you're trying to effect change in an organization, at some point you will ultimately have to work with people's beliefs. You will have to clarify those beliefs. And you will have to work with people on an individual basis, and why can really help you with that. Now, one of the answers you might get with why is, I don't know. But people often avoid saying, I don't know. People don't like to admit that they don't know. And if we ask someone why, and someone doesn't know, we've got a risk now that we're asking them to make something up. To avoid saying that they don't know, they make something up, and then that becomes a belief. They then have to justify. We've put someone in a position where they have to continue justifying that statement that they just made up, so they don't get seen as lying or changing their mind or not knowing what's going on. Right? Why is a difficult question for people to deal with if there is no formal evidence-based belief that they can really justify. It's one of the reasons why when I'm telling people that they really need to own their definitions and how they communicate test processes or anything that they do in testing and their communication of testing, it's because we want it to be based on beliefs that we can justify, beliefs that we've gone through this process of, that we have a firm bedrock that we can deflect any question of, and that we are comfortable with that questioning process around our beliefs and models because we've done it to ourselves first. So we're comfortable at the notion of looking at the reasons behind doing testing in a certain way, the reasons for choosing a particular tool, the reasons for using a particular language. We're comfortable with that because we've done that process ourselves, so we can handle that questioning process even when people throw whys at us. But most people have not done that. So if you start asking them why, you may get weak beliefs that are not based on evidence, that are based on calls to authority, like some expert said X. Now we also have to be clear on the reasons that we are asking the question. right? Because without a proper context to questioning, people may read motivations into the question. So you get a response, well, why are you asking? Why can trigger a lot of negative motivation. How, when, what are more neutral, depending on how you ask them, and can trigger less resistance. But we have to be clear that we know the reasons behind our question. We have to know why we're asking the question. We don't just want it to be a filler where we're getting any answer. Now, that might be useful in the early days of a questioning process. If we have no model, we have nothing to work from, we don't know what direction the investigation is going to go in, why might be a good starting point. Because then we might have a series of conflicting beliefs if we're working with multiple people, and we can look at that if we know how to handle that kind of group analysis. We may just be building up lots of information to see what route we're going to tackle first, to see what experiments we're going to go on. But if we keep chaining whys, at that point, we're going to get too much information and may not know what to target. I also want, when I'm asking questions, to have much more conscious direction and control over the questions that I'm asking, so that when I'm doing problem solving, I know what problem I'm targeting. When I'm building models, I know what models I'm building and what purpose I'm going to use them for, so that I'm actually chaining on my models and my model exploration rather than chaining beliefs of someone else that's coming in. So I'm not suggesting that you throw away why entirely, right? Because why is an incredibly useful question. It's really useful for dealing with beliefs. It's really useful for dealing with motivations. If you want general unspecified answers, why is brilliant. If you want to know how people interpret ambiguity when they're asked in a conversation, why is a good way to trigger that. Because what you're really getting when you ask why is you're getting information about the person and how they interpret questions and their model of the world, rather necessarily than the thing that you are actually asking about. And if you are wanting to affect change and you want people's beliefs, that's really useful. If you want to understand the motivations behind something which will help you in your change process, why is good. And when we are taking action, we want to understand the motivations that we have, the beliefs that are driving us. Asking ourselves why is a really good way to use that. So I'm trying to explain a little bit around some of the thoughts that I have on why. A lot of this is built from certainly reading the lean and the management books, but also reading psychotherapy books and how psychotherapists deal with why questions. And I'm not trying to convince you with a whole bunch of evidence there, because I think that you could do this yourself. Right? You could look at, when you ask a why question, think, well, what could I have asked instead? Could I have phrased that differently to get the answer that I was looking for? Did I know the type of answer that I wanted, or did I just ask why? Was this a general conversation one? Did I have a model in my head? And if you find yourself going in a roundabout route in a conversation, think back on it later and go, could I have been more direct and avoid why questions? Could I have got to that answer earlier? Did I know I needed to get to that point? How can I adjust my model so I can get to that? Own and try and improve the modeling process that we have so that we can ask better questions. If you ask why questions, did you get the answer, the type of answer that you wanted? Did the person interpret it as a what question or a where question or a who question? Did the person respond as you hoped, or did they have resistance behind it? Could you have avoided that with a different type of question? And so you will have all the time to experiment with this and all the evidence when you're engaging with people and yourself. I think it's a useful experiment to try, but you can try it for yourself and find out. So I'm going to leave you with a couple of quotes. These are from Fritz Perls' The Gestalt Approach, which is a very small book. So on page 77, I've got my bookmark here, which is an EvilTester sticker. If you ever see me at a conference or an event, I will undoubtedly have EvilTester stickers in my pocket somewhere so you can ask about them. Now in here, Fritz Perls is targeting why. He's got an entire paragraph here. What I find interesting here is he says, I have discussed this somewhat before. Why is a topic that I have mentioned in numerous presentations. I did a web search to try and find the Fritz Perls quote that I'm going to read out now, and the result that came back was information that I'd put out on the web from several years ago. So I've talked about this before, but I just wanted something in the podcast that really focused on this, because I think it's a massively important topic to get your head round. And I keep seeing people on Twitter asking why this, not getting the responses they back, going down in tangents, going nowhere simply because of the question that's being asked. So Fritz Perls starts this with, the why questions produce only pat answers, defensiveness, rationalizations, excuses, and the delusion that an event can be explained by a single cause. The why does not discriminate purpose, origin, or background. Right? There's no context there. We have to help people understand what we're asking to avoid that. And he goes on to say that if we keep doing this, then we risk that we join the group of worrying grandmothers who attack their prey with such pointless questions as, why did you catch that cold? And why have you been so naughty? Now, one of the risks that you have when you engage in this kind of process is that you get to the point where why can be a very difficult question to answer when someone asks you it, because you don't know how to parse it. So you end up asking a question back in terms of, well, do you mean how did I do this? Did you mean what did I do instead? Do you mean where? And you try and help that person ask the question, which again can smoothen relationships. And as a consultant, that's a useful technique to be able to help people ask questions of you so that they get the answer they want, so that you're not misinforming them with information that you're giving back. So that's a couple of Fritz Perls quotes from the Gestalt approach. If you do get the book, you can find it on page 77. And if you want a quote for test consultancy, then contact me via eviltester.com/consultancy. And if you found this podcast useful or any value in any of my podcasts or books or anything, do let people know. Do leave a tick or a like or a review on iTunes or YouTube or wherever you found this, because it's important to proactively tell people about good stuff rather than have them ask you, why are you listening to that?